Folks, having been in the sound check, you are in for something quite extraordinary this evening. I'm a huge fan of Bethan's work, and when the opportunity came to invite Bethan to become part of the program, we sort of wondered, like, what was something that you could do, because it's been quite a dynamic period for you, Bethan. You've actually left the Pacific for another home, or returned home.
Yeah, I'm from Scotland originally, and I started the process of moving back there in April. So it's been a sort of 4 or 5 month process, and just it's lovely to be back here to do this performance. And yeah, so the whole process has been quite an interesting one.
But we found a kind of point of resonation for you, which was this idea of the coastlines here. You know, as I guess, in some ways, a receiving of the waves, quite literally, but also as a way of kind of tracing a line, an energetic line that maybe extends elsewhere in the Pacific. Do you want to talk about how you kind of came to it?
Yeah, so the piece contains recordings, some of which I made up to about 5 years ago. It's a kind of collection of different recordings from different locations in the Washington coast and California coast. And they are areas that have a sort of different kind of materiality. So the sand is pebbles, there's rocks. And these are the points where we're sort of hearing the crashing, breaking waves and their interactions with these different types of sort of geological features. And what really kind of struck me is that what we're hearing at that moment is the sort of culmination of this energy that's been traveling sometimes great distances across the ocean. And we hear it in the moment that these waves are crashing onto the shore. This energy is sort of dissipating in different ways. And I sort of started thinking back into the journey that those waves are taking and what's happening during that process. So sort of looking at wave dynamics and what's actually happening with that process before we hear that crashing sound.
And you approached I mean, obviously there's some atmospheric recordings, but there's also hydrophonic recordings. Do you want to just talk about some of the processes that you worked with to kind of capture that energy?
Yeah, so using different types of microphones to listen to and then record really any subject, but particularly in this case, the different areas of shoreline. It gives you different perspectives. You can take, like I have a sort of surround sound microphone that gives me a really kind of detailed, far image of a sort of broad perspective of the ocean sound. And moving that sort of closer, you start to get more detail. But using hydrophones, which are underwater microphones that, in this case, I buried them in amongst pebbles and amongst the sand, you start to hear the movement of those materials and the real kind of detail of what's happening in that moment, and those, which is partially where the title comes from, in that the sand and the pebbles, they kind of, from a distant perspective, they look still. You see the movement of the water, but the shoreline in that time, it seems to be not moving. As you kind of hone in on those details, you hear all of the movement that's happening, and it starts to give you this kind of picture of what happens over greater timescales and geologic time, that these shorelines are ultimately changing significantly in sort of non-human time frames.
Well, it's kind of an interesting interaction between, I guess, the materiality, the thing that the water is, where that energy is almost transferring to or through, and then how it kind of is this give and take of the shoreline somehow.
Yeah, definitely. It's the pebbles recordings, which were made in the Washington coastline. They have this really rich sound. It's audible from the sort of more distant perspective and from the above water recordings. You can hear the kind of rich tones of it, but when you start to listen to the hydrophone recordings, it sort of isolates it away from the kind of wash sound of all the water. And it's like a deep sort of rumble, which is quite an incredible sound that when you're listening, particularly listening in headphones and looking out to the ocean, which you kind of understand as having this sort of very white, noisy, sort of washy sound, and just hearing in headphones this deep rumble, it really gives you an image of the power of it and all of this energy, and that's really the sort of beginnings of tracing it back to, you know, the origins, which is often like the wind disturbances on the surface of the water, which is where the piece begins tonight.
I think that's a beautiful place to leave it. Everyone, Bethan Kellough.